If you've spent any time at all watching content from me, you know how much I hype up becoming an electrician as a fantastic career choice. And while I absolutely believe that this career is a golden opportunity hidden in plain sight, it ain't always sunshine and roses. The reality is that for electricians and just about any other blue-collar trade, layoffs are a very real possibility. And I think it's important that if you're considering a career in the trades, that you're informed about them, so that you not only know what to potentially expect, but also how to potentially be prepared should you ever see a layoff. I will be briefly touching on ways that you can be financially prepared for layoffs in this video, but I'm also going to make a whole separate video where I go much more in depth in that topic. And real quickly, I want to ask that if you're a tradesman and you have any words of wisdom or stories about layoffs based off of your own knowledge or personal experience, that you go ahead and write those down in the comments below, as the comment section of this video also serves as a great resource for anybody who is considering becoming an electrician or another type of tradesman as a career. So first, let's talk about the different things that can lead to a layoff, because it's not always just as simple as you weren't a good worker, so you got let go. While it's absolutely true that if you're a bad employee, you're going to be much more susceptible to being laid off, especially when times are hard, there are all sorts of different factors that can play a role in you getting laid off. And a lot of these contributing factors might be completely outside of your control. It's generally when things start slowing down that contractors have to start making those difficult decisions, and subsequently, people start getting laid off. And one major thing that can lead to work slowing down is when things aren't going well with the economy. If there's some sort of economic downturn, whether it be nationwide or with your local economy, development will usually start slowing down. And whether it be commercial, residential, or industrial, the economy can bring work in all of those areas to a screeching halt pretty quickly. And yes, there are some areas of work that are going to be a little more insulated from this than others, like healthcare, for example, which is where I'm currently working in. The economy will generally affect, at least in some way, almost every kind of work. You also have to take where you live into consideration. Do you live in the city, or do you live in a more rural area where there just isn't much development happening even when times are good? See, another very simple thing that can cause layoffs is when your company just doesn't have another project to send you to once the current one is finished. And whether you end up working for a large or a small company, this is something that is always a possibility. There's also massive projects that can keep hundreds or even thousands of construction workers employed. And as you can imagine, once those projects start coming to an end or even just start slowing down, it can suddenly leave a lot of people out of work and looking for work all at the same time. It's usually places like massive high-tech microchip plants or data centers where you'll see the scenario play out. Here in the Portland, Oregon area, well, actually technically Hillsboro, Intel is one of those massive microchip plants that plays a huge role in keeping our local unions thriving. It's not just us union electricians at IBEW Local 48 that Intel keeps thriving. It's also the plumbers, the pipe fitters, and all sorts of other trades too. So while things are great here, when Intel keeps a lot of the workers from our locals working, which is really the majority of the time, as you can imagine, things are not as great here when things at Intel start to slow down. Really, the list of things that can cause layoffs just goes on and on, whether they be predictable or not. Now, I've never been laid off myself, but I've still experienced the realities of layoffs and how they can affect families firsthand, as my dad was unfortunately impacted by layoffs that were completely beyond his control. My dad's actually a pipe fitter for Local 290 here in the Portland, Oregon area, and back in 2002, the bottom just suddenly fell out. Despite my dad being an incredibly hard worker, work for Local 290 just suddenly slowed down, pretty much all at once, and it left a lot of people out of work. In total, my dad was laid off for 15 months, but during that time, he did what he had to do to provide for and take care of us. On top of collecting unemployment, my dad worked with my uncle in his landscaping business and also did some other side hustle type stuff here and there to help make ends meet. I was only around 8 years old when all of this happened, and while I do remember that things were tighter for us during this time, in the end, even though 15 months is quite a while to be laid off, my dad did eventually go back to work for Local 290 when his name finally got called on the list. Now, this concept of having your name called on the list is something that I want to talk about, because it's one of the major differences in the ways that layoffs will affect you if you're in the union versus in the non-union. If you're in the union and you get laid off, you go to your union hall, sign the books, and wait for your name to get called on the list. That's it. Once your name gets called, that means that there's a contractor that is looking to hire the next person that is on the list. and it's going to be up to you, the next person on the list, to decide whether or not you want to accept that call. So if there's hundreds of other people in front of you on the list, you're still going to have to wait your turn in line until your name gets called to go back to work, which of course means that those other hundreds of people all need to have their name called first to return back to work before you get your name called. Depending on the severity of the conditions that cause your layoff or the mass layoffs, you might be sitting on the books for a day, a month, or even potentially 15 months like my dad was. Now, if you're in the non-union and you get laid off, it's going to be completely up to you to go out there and find yourself another job. And while there's no list for the non-union, if the economic or situational conditions are the same, you could find yourself looking for a job for the same amount of time, as there could be hundreds or even thousands of other non-union tradesmen looking for a job too. The main difference, of course, is that you're going to be the one that's going out there and looking for a job for yourself. There's not going to be a list that you're on at the union hiring hall that's eventually going to provide a job for you. In some cases, that might actually be nice because you might be able to just go out there and right away score yourself another job. In other situations, that might actually make things extra difficult because it could still take a very long time, and you're of course going to be the one that's going to be out there and spending all of that time and energy trying to find another job. But hey, you're already out of a job, so it's not like you have anything better to do. Now, believe me when I say my intent with this video is not to scare you out of joining the trade. It's actually really just to raise your level of awareness of what could potentially happen so that in the case that you do eventually see a layoff, you'll know what to expect and how to be prepared. So here are some very almost painfully basic things that you can do to prepare yourself for a potential layoff. And quick disclaimer, this is for entertainment purposes only. This is not financial advice, as I am not a financial advisor. The first thing you should do, which sounds like a no-brainer because it is save money. Yes, it's so obvious that it feels dumb to even need to mention that, but I've just seen time and time again where when people start getting raises and they start to make pretty good money, rather than saving some of that money and tucking it away for a rainy day, they go out and start buying all of these brand new expensive toys and start living a much more lavish lifestyle. Look, I'm all for your quality of life going up as you start making good money, but if you're not saving some of that money, you're doing something wrong. And a good rule of thumb that comes from the man himself, Dave Ramsey, is to have 3 to 6 months of monthly expenses saved up and set aside for emergencies, which I know is definitely easier said than done. One thing that you can and should do to get your 3 to 6 month emergency fund saved up is to live below your means and spend less than you make. Another thing that is strangely unusual these days that will help you get your savings up and keep your monthly expenses down is to not go into debt for anything other than your mortgage. So basically, if you avoid debt, live below your means, and save up money when times are good, it's going to make things much easier for you should those bad times ever come. Now, you might hear me talking about saving up 3 to 6 months worth of monthly expenses and immediately think about how I just said a couple of minutes ago how my dad was laid off for 15 months. Remember that when you get laid off, you're also going to be able to collect unemployment, which means that your 3 to 6 month emergency fund might actually be able to stretch out and turn into something more like a 9 to 12 month emergency fund, or even more, when you combine the two to supplement your lost income. Additionally, like my dad did, just because you're waiting for a job to show up at a job site doesn't mean that you can't figure out some sort of side hustle to make some extra money in the meantime. And one more thing that you might want to consider if things are not going well in your area is temporarily traveling for work, at least until there's work available in your area again. This is also something that my dad did for a little while when things were slow with Local 290, and his willingness to do that for us helped our family avoid another difficult financial time. And actually, he made some really killer money when he was traveling. Now, there are some trades that are going to be much more susceptible to layoffs than others, and some trades that are going to be not near as likely to see a layoff. Electrical, plumbing, and HVAC are just some of the trades that are going to be a lot better to be in when things start slowing down, as even when times are slow, there's still always going to be things that need to be serviced or fixed. Really, for the most part, there is pretty consistent work for those trades. And yes, I'm a little biased because I'm an electrician myself, but I do think that electricians are probably the #1 trade that's going to be consistently working even when times are slow. Now, even though I've seen that times can be tough when things like layoffs happen, I've also seen what an incredible career this can be and what a great living it can provide for you and your family. Yes, as I've talked about, things can happen that are beyond your control, but for the most part, if you are a good, hardworking employee and your company sees a lot of value in you, they're going to do everything that they can to try to keep you around even when things start slowing down and when times are hard. In my career as an electrician, I've worked with lots of people who, even during the slow, difficult times, consistently worked all the way through and have literally never seen a single layoff. But like anything, I think you should always hope for the best and be prepared for the worst. And remember, getting laid off or let go is something that can happen in any job. It's not something that's just unique to the trades. And if you're unsure of whether or not you want to join this trade or another trade because you're worried about potentially being laid off someday, I wouldn't let that fear stop you from missing out on a career that, at least for me, has been one of the best decisions I've ever made in my entire life. Go ahead and hit me with a like if you enjoyed this video, and make sure to subscribe to my channel so that way you can stay up to date every time that I release new content. Thanks for watching and have a good one.